We are continuing today with our previous lecture on hormones, where we laid some foundation for the endocrine system. So today we'll take a look at the hormones themselves specifically. Previously, we looked at cellular communication broadly. And today we'll now go looking at the endocrine system more specifically. So this is where we ended the last time, where we looked at the various glands and tissues that are part of the endocrine system, starting from the brain, the pineal gland, the pituitary gland. Even before the pituitary gland, we referred to the hypothalamus. And then we also saw that at the neck region, you have the thyroid and the parathyroid glands, which sometimes we just refer to all of it as thyroid glands. Then we have these adrenal glands, which are at the anterior position of the kidneys, the pancreas, which is both an exocrine and an endocrine gland, because it secretes the hormone insulin into the digestive system, and at the same time that insulin also goes into the bloodstream, controlling blood glucose levels. And then the gonads, the ovaries in females and the testes in males, responsible for the secretion of sex hormones. And then we took a look at the structure of the structure of the endocrine system. But before we get to that and look at it again, remind ourselves of it, what we are going to do is we are starting from the top, from the brain, looking at each of the glands and the hormones they secrete, the functions of these hormones. In some cases, we'll look at the structure of these hormones. So we're starting from the pineal gland in the brain, which is responsible for the secretion of the hormone melatonin. And melatonin is responsible for the regulation of sleep patterns. So what we refer to as the circadian rhythm, sometimes in common language, we say the biological clock. That is to say that in the morning, for every normal human being, you should awake from sleep. And then when it's dark in the night, you should feel sleepy and go to bed. So that there is that rhythm, which we refer to as the circadian rhythm or the biological clock in common language. And this is controlled by the hormone melatonin. And melatonin is secreted by the pineal gland. Now, what you see is that so melatonin will be secreted in higher amounts in the night by the pineal gland, and that will have some effect on the central nervous system, which will cause us to feel asleep and go to bed. Now, in the morning, when the sun rises, and you have inside the eyes what we refer to as melanopsin-containing retinal ganglion cells, which are sometimes also referred to as intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. That is to just say that there are some cells that are sensitive to light in the eyes, so that when it gets brighter in the day, when in the morning it's getting brighter, the eyes respond so that the signal is sent from those cells through the retinohypothalamic tract, the RHT, to what we refer to as the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that will have some inhibition effect on the pineal gland. So that inhibition on the pineal gland will cause the secretion of melatonin to be decreased. So generally, when it's about, say, 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. thereabouts, you have melatonin secreted in such high amounts that should cause us to sleep, to go to bed. Of course, this is not something which is the same for everybody. It can vary with different stages. Because, for instance, children will have a different sleep pattern than adults. And even for adult individuals, we have different, the times. Some people may have trained themselves such that when it is 7 o'clock, you have melatonin in such high amounts. Of course, this is responding to darkness. So somebody in some rural area somewhere that there is no light, obviously will go to bed much, much earlier than somebody in the urban societies that, there's a lot of light even in the night, a lot of activity. All that also, has some effect on this system. But I mean, biologically, generally, that's what I said from the beginning, naturally and normally for every human being, this is the system which should be working on the central nervous system, causing us to sleep. So that the eyes have such sensitive cells to light, which will have some effect on the pineal gland, either to secrete melatonin or inhibited in the secretion of melatonin, which is responsible for the regulation of sleep pattern. Now, the dysfunction of this system of the pineal gland or the secretion of melatonin can result into mood disorders. So that lack of sleep debt can result into some depression, anxiety, and in some very severe cases where some persons haven't slept for hours. Some of these can be found in some serious psychotic disorders, like schizophrenia. You will find dysfunction of this system, the secretion of melatonin, resulting into such very severe psychotic conditions. Or maybe there's some sleeping disorders like insomnia, sleepless nights. Person is not having enough of melatonin, which is going to induce sleep. And so that can result into such situations. And in some cases too, you have what we refer to as precocious puberty, which is a developmental disorder in young children, such that young children begin to show signs of, say, adolescence, say the development of the sexual reproductive system much, much earlier than normal, which is what we refer to as precocious puberty. Is a developmental disorder which can be as a result of a dysfunction in this system, in the dysfunction of the pineal gland, in the secretion of melatonin. Right. Now, we also looked at the structure of the endocrine system in general, looking at the hypothalamic hormones, the anterior pituitary hormones, endocrine targets, and even non-endocrine targets. so that we saw that the hypothalamus secretes releasing hormones, different ones, dopamine, what we refer to also as prolactin release inhibiting hormone, uh, thyrotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, somatostatin, what we also refer to as growth hormone release inhibiting hormone, and growth hormone release hormone, and then the gonadotropin release hormone. So what you see is that the hypothalamus is secreting, releasing hormones. And so even in the name, so these things are quite straightforward. When you just look at the name, you can just tell that this hormone, which is being secreted by the hypothalamus, is inducing the release of a certain hormone. So you see that all these hypothalamic hormones are release hormones, except for dopamine or prolactin release inhibiting hormone, which is doing the opposite by inhibiting the anterior pituitary from secretion of prolactin. Also, you see somatostatin. Somatostatin also together with the growth hormone release hormone regulating the release of growth hormone. And you have this gonadotropin release hormone, also acting on the anterior pituitary, which will result into the release of the follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, from the anterior pituitary. And we saw also that the hypothalamus does not act on the posterior pituitary. So the posterior pituitary is on its own. It's autonomous. It does not act under the influence of the hypothalamus. So Mohammed, I'll come to you. And then you have these endocrine glands, that each of these hormones that are released by the anterior pituitary are acting on. So these ones, as we go forward, by the time we finish dealing with each and every line, so what we'll do, we'll take each and every line, look at the releasing hormone, the effects that they have, and then we come to the anterior pituitary, take each of these hormones and look at their structures, their functions, in some cases, disease conditions that are associated with their abnormal functions. We'll take a look at all of these things. So by the time we finish, we would have dealt with every single one of these hormones. Also, of course, the posterior pituitary, which is secreting only two hormones, which is the antidiuretic hormone controlling water balance or some mineral balance as well. And then oxytocin, responsible for uterine contraction. In some, also, even we will see that it's also involved in contraction of extramammary glands for the secretion of milk. All right, so Mamadi Mohammed says, please, people that attend late night concerts and still sleep, that a bright light has no stimulus on the eyes. So yes, you do attend, some late night program, and then you are tired, you go to bed, but you will admit that the sleep you sleep during the day is not the same as the sleep in the night. So that no matter how tired that you are, you sleep for shorter hours. You sleep up to a certain time, and you no longer, you are no longer able to sleep. You get up. But if it was in the night that you were sleeping, you could sleep continuously for hours, because that is actually the time, the normal time for a human being, to be sleeping. So yes, there are times because of some events, you keep late at night. Sometimes maybe students, when it's time for examination, you are studying so late in the night. But you will admit that when you are studying late into the night, you feel sleepy, you feel tired, and what happens is that um, it's estimated that the time that you have the maximum amount of melatonin being secreted in the body, that you feel the deepest of sleep is around 2 a.m. So you could realize that sometimes when you are so late into the night, working, doing something, when it gets to such a time, and you feel very sleepy, a very heavy sleeping effect comes upon you, and then if you force yourself through it and you don't sleep at that time, you resist it, all of a sudden that leaves you and you are not able to sleep again, because that's a peak, and from that peak it begins to go down. The concentration begins to go down, so you will not be able to sleep until later, during maybe early dawn somewhere, that you decide to go to sleep before you sleep. So yes, depending on your work, your activities, you force yourself through some of these times. But of course, if you want to have a sleep during the day to pay for such, you are obviously not going to have that straight, maybe 6 to 8 hours of sleep that you usually have when you go to bed in the night. And Dorcas Akwete said, please, why do people sleep in the day and unable to sleep at night? All right, so yes, you sleep, for instance, if it's in the evening, somewhere around 3 and maybe up to 4 or 5. And then later, the normal time that you usually sleep, when that time comes, because you have just woken up, you are not able to go to bed again. It doesn't necessarily mean that melatonin is not being secreted, but you must also, um, pay attention and consider the fact that, yes, we are looking at one particular system, which is just the pineal gland secreting melatonin, depending on light. It does not necessarily mean that it is that single factor that controls sleep, because that even during the day, when you are doing something, you are working, you feel sleepy sometimes when you are very tired, even during the day. It's only that you sleep with for a short time and then you are okay. You get up and then you are fine. There are other things that can cause you to feel asleep, like even food. For instance, if you eat, it is during the day, you eat some heavy food, and then some amount of your energy shifts into the metabolism of the food that you have just eaten. That induces some sleep. So I mean, even in some jurisdiction, they have uh, this siesta after lunch, which is a normal thing, that when people go for lunch, right after lunch, the first hour after lunch is a siesta, which is a general thing in the society. So you see in some of these societies, all the shops will be closed. The whole place becomes very quiet for about 1 hour. People are sleeping right after um, their lunch. And then after 1 hour, you see they are active again. So also depending on the particular geolocation, the location where you are, because even though I talk about the times, time melatonin is secreted and you feel asleep and all of that, you know that you can't compare, say, our society in Ghana to some other society in some temperate regions, that they have different seasons. Say they have winter, have summer, spring, autumn. Those are different times. That is not like the way for us. Almost every time when it is about 6 a.m. in the morning, it gets bright. And when it is about 6 p.m. in the evening, it gets dark. Almost all the time, it's like that. But it's not like that at all locations in the world. In some places, it will get dark somewhere around 9 p.m. And when it is, that is, say, if it is in summer. And similarly, by the time it is about, say, 3 a.m. thereabouts, it's already bright. So there are different effects you feel in these places. All right, so Mama D again said, how effective is energy drink on you, not sleeping early? All right, I don't know if this has got anything to do with what we are doing over here, so I don't think we should bother ourselves about this energy drink stuff. All right, so we can continue and look at hypothalamic hormones. The first one, which is the thyrotropin releasing hormone, which is a tripeptide. I mean, if you remember, we did some classification of the hormones, looking at hydrophobic hormones and hydrophilic hormones. And we saw, hydrophilic hormones to be those ones that will not be able to penetrate through the cell membrane into the cytoplasm, but they will bind to receptors on the cell surface and then trigger some biochemical response inside the cell. And we refer to some compounds like cyclic adenosine monophosphate as second messengers. So here, if you see a tripeptide, quickly you can now relate to that to say this is going to be a hydrophilic hormone. It's not going to penetrate into the cell. If it was a steroid hormone, then of course that is a lipid, and so it will easily penetrate into the cell. And I mean the amino acids that are here. So here's another thing. When you were doing biological chemistry in first year, you did study the structure of amino acids. So I have intentionally shaded different portions of this structure to show the amino acid residues that are bonded together. So you can go and do some revision and look at those structures and see that yes, proline, histidine, you have seen. Maybe you haven't seen pyroglutamic because it's not one of those amino acids which is found in proteins, but it's an intermediate of protein metabolism. So yes, you find this as a tripeptide, and you see the activity of this thyrotropin releasing hormone. On the right hand side, you see the hypothalamus releases that thyrotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the anterior pituitary, stimulating the anterior pituitary to secrete thyroid stimulating hormone, which will then act on the thyroid gland. So when it stimulates the thyroid gland, then the thyroid gland will now secrete thyroid hormones, which are triiodothyronine and tetraiodothyronine. So these are the two hormones. Usually you see them being written T3, T4. If you see T3, it's triiodothyronine. If you see T4, it's tetraiodothyronine. And even you see right from even from the previous lecture, when you look at the structure of the endocrine system, you realize that all the hormones have some feedback mechanism by which the endocrine system is regulated, so that when these hormones are secreted in adequate amounts, they begin to inhibit the activity of the glands that are involved in their secretion. So you see that the thyroid hormones are acting back on the pituitary gland. That is to give it a feedback message, inhibiting it from further secreting thyroid stimulating hormone, because you now have those hormones in adequate amounts. Similarly, they can go up and act also on the hypothalamus, inhibiting it, preventing it from secreting further thyrotropin releasing hormone. Second is the corticotropin releasing hormone. These two is secreted by the hypothalamus, and this is a polypeptide consisting of 41 amino acids. So it's quite a big protein, and when it's released by the hypothalamus, it acts also on the anterior pituitary. Remember, all the hormones which are being secreted here by the hypothalamus will be acting on the anterior pituitary, stimulating it to secrete a particular hormone. So here too, the corticotropin releasing hormone secreted by the hypothalamus stimulates the anterior pituitary, and that stimulation results in the anterior pituitary secreting adrenocorticotropin hormone, which then acts or stimulates the adrenal glands, which are found on the anterior position of the kidneys. And the stimulation of these adrenal glands will result into the secretion of hormone cortisol, which is secreted in some stress conditions. Cortisol, you later will also see, is involved also in various metabolic processes. Now we move to the gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is also secreted by the hypothalamus, acting on the anterior pituitary, stimulating it to secrete luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. And these two, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, then act on the gonads, which are the ovaries, the testes, and the ovaries then will secrete the female reproductive hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and you have the testes also secreting the androgens, the male sexual reproductive hormones, which are testosterone. And you can see these two have such a feedback mechanism where the hormones, estrogen and androgens, act back on the anterior pituitary, inhibiting it from further secreting luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone when they are in adequate amounts. They can also act directly on the hypothalamus to inhibit it from further secreting gonadotropin releasing hormone. Even from here, the anterior pituitary itself also has some what we are referring to as a short feedback, can give such a feedback to the hypothalamus when it is inhibited by um, the hormones estrogen and androgens, which are in adequate amounts. You will see also that short feedback occurring. Now we can take a look at the growth hormone together with somatostatin, or the growth hormone release inhibiting hormone, because these two act together to control growth. So what we see here is that you have hypothalamus secreting the two hormones, the growth hormone release hormone, and then somatostatin, which is the growth hormone release inhibiting hormone. So the two of them act on the anterior pituitary to control the secretion of the growth hormone, which then stimulates the liver to secrete some insulin-like growth factors. These are some proteins which participate in various metabolic processes, particularly metabolism of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, because it is those metabolic processes which will be involved in growth, for children, or let's say even in adults, let's say repair of tissues. You have these insulin-like growth factors, acting. And you see the effect of this is that you have, increase in bone mass or bone length, of course, which is going to result in the growth in height, the growth of muscle tissue. And of course, what you see here is a depiction of adipocytes, cells of the adipose tissue, where you have storage of lipids in the form of triacylglycerol, so that this can result into the breakdown of these triacylglycerols, which will generate some energy as well. In some cases, it will rather be doing the opposite, because it's supposed also to make you feel hungry, so that you go and eat, because food is also necessary for growth, so that you don't have these fatty acids from the adipose tissue, giving back energy. Because the moment you have enough energy in the bloodstream, enough energy flowing in you, then it means that that feeling of hunger will not be there. So the insulin-like growth factors also inhibit the breakdown of these fatty acids in the adipose tissue. Then, of course, both of these hormones, the growth hormone releasing hormone and the growth hormone release inhibiting hormone, both of them are peptides. The growth hormone releasing hormone is a polypeptide consisting of 44 amino acids. Somatostatin consists of 14. We can say that is an oligopeptide. So usually, if you have amino acids of 1 up to, say, 20, let's say 2 amino acids, that is a dipeptide. Up to 20 amino acids, you refer to that as an oligopeptide, and above that it will be a polypeptide. All right, Bright Natesaki says, can you go over the triggers, the feedback, positive and negative? I mean, you are talking about this growth hormone release inhibiting the growth hormone release hormone and the growth hormone inhibiting hormone. I think when you wrote the question, I was still talking about it. That both of them, you have the growth hormone release hormone acting on the anterior pituitary, the same way as you have somatostatin acting on the anterior pituitary. And it's intentional, we represent this with green and this with red, so that they are having opposite functions, but the two of them are acting on the anterior pituitary to control growth. There shouldn't be too much of growth, and there shouldn't be too less of growth. And so both of them act on the anterior pituitary, controlling it in the release of the growth hormone, which acts on the liver to release insulin-like growth factors. So that's what I mean by, okay, but I think what you are talking about is feedback. Feedback. Okay, the last place I talk about a feedback is here, where I refer to, okay, this is because you have seen it written there that you have both positive or negative. So this is to say that if you have enough amount of the hormones, which is the estrogens and the androgens, in the bloodstream, because the hormones are secreted by the gonads and they are in adequate amounts already in the bloodstream, then the effect they are going to have on the hypothalamus is going to be negative. That is to say that it is going to inhibit the hypothalamus from further secreting gonadotropin release hormone. But it will be positive if the amount of estrogen and androgens are lesser in the bloodstream, to say there isn't adequate amount of it. So it will give that positive feedback, that is to cause it to secrete more of this gonadotropin release hormone. So you can have both positive or negative feedback. So that's what it means when what you are reading there, positive or negative. If you have enough, then there should be a blockage of the hypothalamus for secreting more or releasing hormone. If you don't have enough, if you have lesser than normal, then you should have a positive feedback, which means it should now cause it to secrete more. So that's the meaning of what is there. All right. So I hope that is okay. Now we can move on to at where were we? We were here. So we can move to the prolactin release inhibiting hormone, which is also referred to as dopamine. And here you see this is an amino acid derivative. You remember we looked at some of these hormones, which were amino acid derivatives. And I drew your attention to the fact that if you say an amino acid derivative is a single amino acid that is modified. But if you say a peptide hormone, it means at least you must have two amino acids to have a peptide. And this is one of the examples that we saw. Dopamine, which is also a hypothalamic hormone. And here, the activity of dopamine is quite different from the ones we've been looking at so far, that apart from somatostatin. So this is also acting just like somatostatin, except that it is acting alone. It's not like you have growth hormone and then somatostatin acting together. But here you have only dopamine, and what dopamine is doing is inhibiting the secretion of prolactin from the anterior pituitary. So you have the anterior pituitary, on its own secreting prolactin. Then dopamine is rather released in order to regulate the secretion of prolactin from the anterior pituitary, where you have that prolactin then acting on the mammary glands. But apart from dopamine acting as a hormone in this way, dopamine also acts as a neurotransmitter. That is in signal transduction in the central nervous system, in the transduction of signals along the neurons. And there's a lot about dopamine, such that it has also this effect of um, happiness, euphoria. So sometimes it's being referred to as happiness hormone. Uh, you have it released more when uh, you receive a reward or you are motivated about something. Say, when uh, let's say you win a competition, for instance, and you've gotten a certain reward, the internal um, response to this results into secretion of much of this hormone dopamine in the system, which is why it also plays a role in addiction, um, and say gambling, for instance, that every time because you you get a certain pleasure from a particular action, and a lot of dopamine is secreted. Each time you want to have such uh, feeling of happiness, euphoria of it. So you have dopamine also playing a role in such. Apart from that, it also plays role in, say, uh, body orientation, which is to say, like your muscle movement. So you don't have clumsy movement of your body, things like that. Of course, this is not the only thing which will be involved in such. Even you have mechanisms of the ear, the tympanic membrane, the fluids in the ear, helping in such process. But this is just one of those systems that also helps in muscle coordination. So apart from dopamine acting as a hormone, you see that in biochemistry, dopamine is having these other different um, you know functions as well. So that was the hypothalamus and its hormones. Now we are moving a step uh, downwards, one step down. So we are moving now to the anterior pituitary. And the anterior pituitary releases hormones that we can classify into three categories. The first category is the growth hormone prolactin group. The second is the glycoprotein hormones. And then the third, pro-opiomelanocortin family. So what we'll do is we'll take each of these groups. We have talked about growth hormone and even prolactin. We've talked about them, but that is to say they are releasing hormones. So now we can talk about the growth hormone itself and talk about, say, prolactin itself. And then we move to talk about glycoprotein hormones and then pro-opiomelanocortin family. Of course, glycoprotein clearly tells you that's a complex of carbohydrates and proteins over there. All right, so let me see. Godfrey says, Doc, please, if dopamine plays these vital roles in addiction, why don't they simply manufacture a homemade injection that addicts can inject whenever they feel the edge of the edge to engage in their addictions? All right, so it's not that simple. That you just. By the way, it isn't that you don't have like synthetic dopamine there. You do. We have there. We have some dopamine as for some hormonal therapy as a pharmaceutical product. Yes, it's there. It's not that it's not there. It's there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that just because someone is addicted to something. If you just give the person dopamine, then it means the person can be cured of such an addiction. One thing you must also know that is that there are also how do you say psychosocial factors, and that also are into play. So you need some um, psychologists, some psychiatrists, uh, not psychiatrists, most of it will be even some psychologists that will also have to do some, psychosocial treatments on such persons. That is not medication. So the same way as even um, psychiatric conditions is not all of it that is just medical, and once you give medicines to such persons it means that you have solved their problem. No. You have to also treat the psychosocial aspects of these things. You can give a person an injection, and when a person finds himself in an environment with the friends that he does these things with, or he sees the thing that he's addicted to, the person will still go for it. So that's why we do have aside medications in psychiatric conditions. Even you still have things like counseling, you have rehabilitation. The person is taken through several processes to restore the person back. So this Godfred is not it's not that simple. We can't reduce all of it to just medication to think that medication will just solve the problem, because what you propose is just looking at the medication aspect, like that's what they refer to as a medical model, to say that everything can be solved with medicine in such a situation. To say if you just give the person an injection, the person will be fine, but it doesn't solve the problem in its entirety. All right. So Godfrey, I hope that's okay. Maybe some of you, if you happen to work in some psychiatric hospital, or maybe with some um, clinical psychologists, you get to understand these things much better. I'm not a specialist in that field anyway. I only happen to have a little bit of understanding of this to know that medication alone cannot just solve the problem. But I think some of you have been doing industrial attachments in some psychiatric hospital or so, that maybe you would have gotten some experiences working under some senior colleagues who may talk about these things. If any of you have worked in those places, maybe after the lecture you can share your experiences, and perhaps it will be interesting for the rest of us to hear how some of these conditions like addiction, people addicted to, say, maybe tobacco, or some drugs, that is not only medication which is used to treat them, but they are also taken through some rehabilitation processes. All right, so we take the first group, which is the growth hormone prolactin group, and here we're looking at a growth hormone, and we see the first thing there. The first statement there is that it consists of 191 amino acids, which is to say it's a polypeptide, so it's also a big protein. And even though we talked of the growth hormone, being secreted by the anterior pituitary, under the influence of the hypothalamus, which released growth hormone, releasing hormone to stimulate the anterior pituitary. Here we see that production of the growth hormone is also influenced by food intake. I think I mentioned when I was talking about the insulin-like growth factors that is also supposed to regulate, metabolism of fatty acids in the or say lipids in the adipose tissue. That is to control the process of lipolysis, because you are supposed to feel hungry and you eat, because eating is also necessary for growth. And by that, you see that the secretion of growth hormone is also influenced by food intake. That is to, say specifically, you have another hormone, which is a digestive hormone called ghrelin, which is secreted by the stomach. And ghrelin stimulates the hypothalamus to secrete the growth hormone, release hormone, which means that feeling of hunger. So ghrelin actually is referred to as hunger hormone. So the stomach, when it's like in times of hunger, it is actually ghrelin which makes you feel hunger. So ghrelin will now, stimulate the hypothalamus to secrete the growth hormone, release hormone. But another thing it will also do is that it will also be acting on the somatostatin, that is inhibiting it to be inhibited, because it has to promote growth. So apart from it, stimulating the secretion of the growth hormone, release hormone is also responsible for you feeling hunger. So you feel hunger, so you eat, and so it's promoting growth by inhibiting somatostatin, and at the same time stimulating the hypothalamus to secrete the growth hormone, release hormone, which will then act on the anterior pituitary. And we also see that ghrelin itself also stimulates the anterior pituitary directly to release the growth hormone, which then will be acting on the liver to release the insulin-like growth factors. The insulin-like growth factors themselves, also when they are secreted in adequate amounts, begin to have that feedback, negative feedback on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. On the other hand, you'll find the insulin-like growth factors, in various metabolic processes, which will be resulting into the increase in bone mass, in growth of the bones, which will result in increase in height and also muscle growth. Similarly, the insulin-like growth factors will also be acting on the somatostatin in that regulatory process. Now, you have the maximum production of the growth hormone is also estimated to be during sleep. Like, right after, the onset of sleep, you have the secretion of the growth hormone increasing in amounts, which is why the statement is made that if you don't sleep, you won't grow. Of course, this is for children, particularly because children require enough sleep actually in their growing stages, so that if there is lack of sleep in children, that can actually result into some stunted growth. It can have some effect of stunted growth in children. apart from the fact that their sleeping also is needed for their intellectual growth as well. Because you know how it is. I usually make an analogy of the way we have our mobile devices that we do recharge them, and then we use them. Then the battery falls, and then we do recharge it again. So it's like that. That's how the brain works. I mean, roughly speaking, say it works like that. Like you are busy doing so many things. You are working during the day, and then in the night you are tired and all of that. So you then have to do a rejuvenation of your uh, of your brain cells, of your system, your whole system, so that you can have the energy for the next day. I mean, that's the rhythm with which the body is working. So that without enough sleep, you realize that your output at work will be low. So sleep is very, very important. That you must sleep in order to have the energy to work. If you are involved in a lot of activity, a lot of work, particularly even for you students that you are doing active learning, you really need to sleep. You have to sleep, because if you don't sleep, you can't have the optimum output from your activities. You just a lot of times you'll be with confusion, and your output will be lower than how it should be if you have good sleep. All right. Well, this is also I was telling, I think, the evening class the last time about the fact that, see, these are some of the things that uh, say some of you that you are studying uh, medical laboratory science. It does not necessarily mean that once you study medical laboratory science, the only thing you can do is to be in a laboratory and be doing medical analysis, taking blood samples and biological samples and be analyzing. That's not the only thing you can do. I mean, some of you who can go into let's say health advocacy, that then maybe some of you go into uh, occupying positions of policy making. So you see, if you don't understand a thing like this, that sleep is important for the growth of children, and actually the real effect of these things, how are you going to make a policy that let's say you are making an educational policy that there should be enough schools, there should be good schools in every community, so that every child will just have to walk 5 minutes, 10 minutes to school. If you take into consideration the kind of condition we have now in Accra, where parents is living maybe somewhere in Adenta and is working in Accra Central, and wakes up because of the traffic situations, will have to leave home maybe 5:30, 6, and because the child is also going to school somewhere in Dansoma, so you have to move the child all the way from Adenta to Dansoma, so that after school, that child will now also come. The driver will go and pick the child to come and be in the office somewhere in the ministries and be waiting for the father, the mother to close before now they move again to Adenta. If you have, schools of the same standard in every community, you have a, proper, well-planned city, in this case. You won't have to let a child wake up at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. The child should have a good sleep. Wake up, say 6, 6:30, prepare, and walk 5-10 minutes. Go to school when you close, walk back home. You need to understand, things like this to be able to, bring about, such policies. So science, as we're studying, is not, again, I think I mentioned it before, just for laboratories and scientific research and just be happy about it, but it's actually for the betterment of society. Now, Godfrey says, Doc, please, is it true that human growth ceases at 25? I heard we fail to grow again when we get to the age of the said age. So, Doc, if that's the case, what happens to this hormone after 25? Okay, so we'll see. We'll actually see with growth hormone. Then, apart from like the question you have asked, I mean, usually for ladies, they grow maybe up to, say, 18 years thereabouts. And then growth slows down, stops. For males, it's a little bit more, maybe up to 20 years. In some people, it can get up to like maybe 22 years. But yes, it is true that around such a stage between 18, 22, 25 will be, I mean, for very, lesser number of people. But somewhere between 18, 22, thereabouts, yes, growth stops. You no longer grow. But another thing that you realize is that we are talking about bone growth or muscle growth, and the fact that growth hormone is being released still in you as an individual at such an age above, say, the age you are mentioning. The growth hormone that is being released actually goes into repair of the tissues, because you can see the growth hormone acts in various metabolic processes, with these insulin-like growth factors that are being secreted from the liver. So it goes to, for the repair of tissues, rejuvenation, much more than say the growth of increase in muscle or increase in bone mass. Okay, Samuel Xiao says, you talk of hormones that influence hunger. Yeah, I mentioned ghrelin. So for those who eat and get satisfied, but still feel like something sweet after a meal. I mean, sweet after a meal is dessert must enter our stomach again. Are we okay? Yes, you are okay. I mean, if you actually live good, I mean, you should have something like a not a 3 square meal, as we refer to in Ghana. That when we say 3 square meal in Ghana, we're talking about eating in the morning, eating in the afternoon, eating in the evening. No, that's not actually I'm talking about. But in fact, in some societies, if you go to eat, you have like 3 different meals. You have the first meal, then you have a second meal, then you have, even before you, the first meal, I'll say, no, even before the first meal, you have, say, some appetizer. And then, so that appetizer, usually maybe it will be some salad. And then you take some more fluid food, which is first meal. And then the second meal will be a more solid food. Then you now will take dessert. So everything little by little. So by the time you finish all of this, you'll be fine. Not like how sometimes you heap things like plenty carbohydrate with some small stew at the side and or some small soup with some one meat or two fish. And no, it's like little by little, small. Actually, the best way to eat is to have a division of your plate. To have some carbohydrates 1/3, some proteins 1/3, vegetables 1/3, and then you would have eaten well. So there's nothing wrong with you if you eat and you want a sweet after meals. It's not that you are hungry, but I mean you are just the sweet is not a heavy food per se. It's also part of the food anyway that you are eating. And then you say, in fact, sometimes if you don't eat that extra food, even though you are satisfied, you can't even sleep. With that being said, does it mean that the hormone is not functioning well? No. It doesn't really mean that the hormone is not functioning well. It only means maybe the food is not enough for you. You are really not satisfied. If you eat and you are satisfied, you will be satisfied that you don't even want to eat anything again. Odro Samuel says, please, what of those who eat severally without getting full? And also, they never increase in weight or height. Please, we are different. Our digestive systems are different. I mean, I think if we come to do, if you look at, I think the very last part of this program, which is on biotransformation, we talk about different groups of people. Some you can divide us into two groups: people who have fast metabolism, persons who have slow metabolism. But that is particularly to do with, say, xenobiotics, like medications, for instance. But it does have also some if some role to play also with digestion in this sense. That if you look at different populations, if you take for instance say a lot of Asians, say from Vietnam, China, Japan, that you see they eat a lot of rice. I mean, if sometimes some of them, if you and them you are together, you are eating, they'll eat more than you, but their body is still small. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them. You eat less, but you look bigger than some of these people. But it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong per se. That's the stature of the person. All right. We can continue and look at, I think the growth hormone has generated a lot of interest in you. So we stayed on there for quite some time. But this is to just show the various functions, which actually we've talked about already. So you see the anterior pituitary is secreting growth hormone, which is acting on the adipose tissue. There, promoting the process of lipolysis, which is the breakdown of the triacylglycerols to generate energy. And at the same time, reducing, the opposite of that process, which is lipogenesis, which is to say you have the synthesis of, the triacylglycerols to go into storage. And of course, we see the effect or the stimulation of the liver to secrete the insulin-like growth factors. And here too, you have some what you refer to as anti-insulin action. I mean, what does insulin do? Insulin goes to reduce blood glucose. But here, if gluconeogenesis will rather be the synthesis of energy generating molecules from the liver to go into the bloodstream. So that is to say the growth hormone rather stimulates the secretion of energy into the bloodstream, because energy is needed for growth. And here you see those insulin-like growth factors are involved in various pathways. Here into some proliferation of cells, and here in some large amounts, so much of large amounts, you can see it's even resulting into some disease condition, like some liver inflammation over there, if that is to say a malfunctioning of that. You have the effect on the muscle, which we talked about, so on muscle growth, and also on increase in bone length, or let's just say bone mass. Of course, also on the what you refer to as the chondrogenesis, that is the synthesis of bones and the cartilages at the joints. So you have all of this occurring with growth hormone. Of course, you have insulin there, which is also secreted by the pancreas, which is also acting in this process. So all of these are acting, controlling, the process of growth. All right, now, so simply, if you put all of this together, what it means simply is that if you have too little of growth hormone being released, it will result into a smaller body. If this is a normal body at the center, the growth hormone being released in the right amount, and then you have, if the growth hormone is released more than normal, then it means such person will have a bigger body than the usual. But that's just a rough, very rough and simplified way of talking about it. But let's look at it more specifically, like what actually happens in humans. We have conditions such as dwarfism, which can occur due to the abnormality of the release of growth hormone. So this can be some genetic disorder, and that remember, the growth hormone is a peptide hormone. So if it's a peptide hormone, it tells you that it's a protein. So if it's a protein, then go back to where we started from, which is the DNA, where you have the genes that are coding for specific proteins. And then we came down to look at what gene expression, transcription, translation, so that if you have some genetic dysfunctions, persons having some genetic disorder that results into a lower amount of growth hormone being secreted in such persons, it will result into smaller bodies. Usually you have the persons having a normal size of trunk, but the limbs are shorter. Sometimes such persons will have maybe bigger heads, but it mostly affects the limbs, the legs, and the hands. Just by this routine scanning that pregnant women go to, some of this is detected, but it's not all of this is detected very early. Some persons already maybe after birth. It is only after they go for what we refer to as this postnatal care, before it's detected that the child is not growing as normal. But when they are going for the prenatals, all the checks do not reveal it. So apart from the scanning, there are some blood tests and things like that, which sometimes reveal even before the person is born. It's not a thing which can be cured, like this kind of the genetic disorder. It's not a thing that can be cured. The only thing which can be done is there are some maybe hormonal therapies, some medications to just manage some of the complications that come with dwarfism, but not to cure it. Then you have the opposite of that will be gigantism, where in such person. So this picture is actually, I think there was in the news some 2-3 years back. There's this gentleman, Suleiman, from Naleregu, I think in the Northeast, who told the story of I think he finished his GSS or so, and then he just realized that he was just growing tall, and not ending. And so you have such. It's not that it's been diagnosed by anyone per se, but I mean just by looking at it, you can tell it is gigantism. What will happen is that you have, apart from so you have increase in the bones of the legs, the limbs, the legs and the hands, but you also will see that such persons will begin to have a hunchback because of the extension which will be happening on the spine. But because the spine cannot stretch so that the trunk stretches to be longer, so they begin to have such a bulge at the back. And so apart from the limbs getting long, you also have such a hunchback also developing in such persons. Yes, here too, some hormonal therapies are tried, some surgeries are worked on, except for some of these things they are much more expensive than it is only few people that are able to access some of these things. Now to one of the questions that somebody asked, if somebody, I think it's Godfred or so, who asked, so if the person is already older and then you're having a secretion of growth hormone, in this case it means that you are already old and you are having an abnormal secretion of growth hormone, which means that the growth hormone is being secreted above normal. What will it result into? That results into what we refer to as acromegaly. So that you see the ends of our bodies are our hands. So our hands is a terminal end of the body. Our feet is also a terminal end of the body. Then our heads is also a terminal end of the body. So if you look at the body, you see that those are the ends of the body. The body will end at the topmost part is the head. And then when you come to the hands, you come to the arms are, the end of the hands, which is, say, our palms. Those are the ends, like palms, fingers, the ends. And then the legs to end with the feet. So for someone who is suffering from overproduction of growth hormone, when the person is already an adult and is no longer going to increase in size, to say in length, in height, the bone is not going to increase in length, and it's not like it's now coming to develop more the body parts to have a growth of muscles. What then happens is that you have the ends, the terminal ends of the body, developing larger than usual. So you have the palm getting bigger than normal. You have the head bone, which will also be extending so that it results into some protruding chin, bigger jaws, sometimes the ears also, then forehead. So you have such a bigger head, and then such person will also have bigger feet. The feet are getting like abnormally big. Such a condition is what is referred to as acromegaly. All right. Now we move to the prolactin. So we were talking about prolactin, the growth hormone prolactin group. And now we finished talking about growth hormone. We are moving on to prolactin. David Afu Bimpon says, Doc, please, for gigantism, is it that somatostatin doesn't work or it's not released as it's supposed to? So it can be both ways, that somatostatin is not being released or is not released in adequate amounts, or growth hormone is being produced in elevated amounts, overproduction. So that's, what it results into is a hormonal imbalance, which can result into gigantism. So that's what it is. Now you have prolactin, which is also a polypeptide that is, responsible for, stimulating what we refer to as lactogenesis, which is, the synthesis of lactose, which is milk sugar. So in general, what it means is that prolactin is involved in the the production of milk for a newborn baby, and at the same time, prolactin also will also be acting in that feedback mechanism. So you see that prolactin, if it's increased, if it's produced in adequate amounts, it begins to inhibit the anterior pituitary. And if the specific cells in the anterior pituitary, which is secreting that prolactin, is what we are referring to as the lactotrophs. So far you can see that the anterior pituitary is, secreting different, hormones, the same way as you saw the hypothalamus secreting different releasing hormones. So definitely there should be specific cells in these glands or tissues that are responsible for the secretion of each of these hormones. And this particular one, prolactin, is being secreted by the lactotrophs. Right. But of course, even apart from that, you can see that you also even have prolactin not only in milk production, but it's even also acting in bone formation and even in the process of the synthesis of sex hormones from cholesterol, what we refer to as steroidogenesis. You'll see prolactin also acting in that process. All right, I think someone has written something. Says, please, that's Odro Samuel. With all the abnormalities, doesn't genetic get a role to play sometimes? I think I mentioned that, yes, you have some, when I was talking about the growth hormone, I mentioned that, referring to the gene expression, which will be resulting into the synthesis of proteins, which will result into the growth hormone. If there is a dysfunction in that process, of course, it will result in such a situation. So yes, and even as we continue, we'll see. I think there will be some one or two more of these conditions that we refer to as some genetic conditions. Now we move to the second, which is the glycoproteins. And these are thyroid stimulating hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, the human chorionic gonadotropin. Now, what we can say quickly here is that you realize that the first three of these hormones, the thyroid stimulating hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone, and the luteinizing hormone, these are real pituitary hormones. Remember, we are talking about hormones that are being secreted by the anterior pituitary. But the last one, which is the human chorionic gonadotropin, is not secreted by the anterior pituitary. But we bring it here because it's also a glycoprotein. They have a similar structure. That is why we bring it here. But it is not a hormone which is secreted by the anterior pituitary. It's rather being secreted by the placenta. And we have these last three. They are gonadotropins, which means they are acting in the sexual reproductive system. The thyroid stimulating hormone is not gonadotropin. So you can quickly see these differences. All right, so Amawu Akofa Gift says, does diet play a role in stimulating growth hormone secretion, or is sleep alone responsible for its release? I think I talked about food as well when I talk about ghrelin, the hormone responsible for us feeling hungry. We saw the activity of ghrelin in that. And then Aaron Money says, to top up, gigantism is most in South Sudan. Why is it common there? I think somebody said a similar thing like this, talking about Sudanese people having, and I was saying that, well, you should not. Are you really sure is gigantism per se? Because yes, you can have persons that are tall. It does not necessarily mean that they are suffering from gigantism. Except, of course, if you have, I don't know, if you have such statistics that is showing that you have gigantism cases that are, more in Sudan than other places. Then we have to be looking at, are there some epigenetic causes? What do they eat? Is it the geological location? What are some of the factors that can cause some of these things? Because there are some places, some countries you go that generally people are tall. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are suffering from gigantism. So I don't know. Maybe check that. Is there a statistics that is? So Aaron Money, is there a statistic that is supporting that gigantism is in the whole world? You find gigantism mostly in South Sudan than all other places in the world. All right, so we're looking at these glycoprotein hormones. The first is the thyroid stimulating hormone. So these are we have talked much about this already, and so it's much more straightforward. You see, now the pituitary gland secretes thyroid stimulating hormone, which acts on the thyroid gland in the neck region, and the thyroid gland then secretes the triiodo and the tetraiodo thyroid, which also can give a feedback to the anterior pituitary to inhibit it from further secreting the stimulating hormone. And then you see the function of that these hormones is that they promote the intake of iodine. Have this in the we have iodide, which is like an inactive form of iodine, which is then converted into um, organification. Organification is that process of conversion of the inactive iodine to active iodine. And so in that sense, okay, we'll see what some abnormalities of this thyroid stimulating hormone in this system can cause if you don't have a adequate uptake of iodine or proper intake of iodine. Is one of the things which actually was a common issue for the Ghanaian health system, that there has been a lot of health campaign, to deal with iodine deficiency in the past. I think now things are much, much more better than before. So we'll see some of these things. All right, so yeah, this is what I was talking about. Okay, Aaron says there's no specific statistics on that. All right. So we as I was talking about the fact that we did have in Ghana a lot of issues with iodine deficiency in the past. Now I think things are much better. That now when you go to the market now or you go to the shops to go and buy salt, you see a lot of the salts around are iodinated salt. It wasn't so before. Earlier, the salts that were there were just the normal, the salt that is mined from Ada. If you go to the market, the shops to buy salt, that's what you will get. But to deal with abnormalities of iodine deficiency with a lot of health campaign in Ghana, and I think there has been a lot of work which was done by the WHO and other health organizations. There was the development of the iodine salt, because it was then seen that salt is something that everybody uses to cook, so that if you want to let everyone in the society get that supplement of iodine, for no one to be lacking iodine, then if we should have salt iodated, it will reach everyone everywhere in Ghana, and it has worked anyway. Now, what happens is that when you have the thyroid gland, which we saw much earlier, they're responsible for the secretion of the thyroid hormones, and there you saw, there's a promotion of the uptake of iodine, also the organification of it. So if there is a dysfunction of the thyroid, what happens, or like particularly when there is a deficiency of iodine, what happens is you see the thyroid glands begin to compensate for such a deficiency and begin to get enlarged. And that can result into the condition which is referred to as a goiter. Now, we also have what's referred to as a congenital hypothyroidism. That so for such persons, you have maybe their mothers at the time of their conception. When their mothers were pregnant, their mothers didn't consume enough of iodine. So there was lack of iodine in their mothers, and which then results into this condition of having smaller bodies. It's just like dwarfism. So now here you see that apart from growth hormone abnormality, which results into dwarfism, here also you are seeing that you can have thyroid abnormalities also resulting into such, which is hypothyroidism, can result into persons having such smaller bodies. you can have also some intellectual disabilities, um, having abnormality in the development of the central nervous system, the brain. So you can have such issues occurring. In this case where um, it's not a genetic disorder, but it's a deficiency. If it's noticed early, say even at the time of pregnancy, such persons can be given supplements. Even if it's not, completely remedied, it would have, improved the situation much, much, much better because it's not a genetic situation. So if such persons are just given some supplements, they can get much better about it. But if it's too late, maybe the person is already giving birth to, if the person is already giving birth to even as a child and it's quickly noticed that there is that deficiency which has caused the person not to be growing so well, and quickly supplementation is done, it can also remedy the situation, at least up to some uh, acceptable extent. All right. Then we move to the follicle stimulating hormone. Here too, secreted by the anterior pituitary, and particularly this is happening from the gonadotrophs. So that's another type of cell in the anterior pituitary responsible for the secretion of these hormones, which act in the sexual reproductive system, the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone. And there's something interesting here which you can quickly pay attention to, because we did this thing right from the beginning when we were talking about this. I think the types of regulation of gene regulation. We talk about constitutive genes and inducible genes, and you see what is happening here. The secretion of follicle stimulating hormone is constitutive, and the secretion of luteinizing hormone is regulated. So, I mean, this is just by the way, so that at least you are not just looking at the fact that you are having some gene expression there, and then you just look at it like that. But you see some of these things, and you should quickly arouse your interest because you did it before. And you see these hormones act on the in males on the testes, in females on the ovaries. So it's acting, it's stimulating them, to secrete the sexual reproductive hormones. But even apart from that, they also have some role to play also in development, just like the growth hormone is doing. You also have that same thing, on the liver, participating in the process of the secretion of the insulin-like growth hormones, which will then regulate various metabolic processes in the adipose tissue, in the bone, in the brain. Of course, even in the uterus, is the same as the sexual function which they are having already. All right, so I see, I think Samuel Gune says, can abnormalities of the growth hormone be inherited? So what you mean is that a genetic disorder which is coming from the parents. I mean, what I know is you do have some genetic disorders that are related to like intellectual disability, which part of it is seen with the height of such person, like almost like dwarfism, and you also have some effect of say the lesser growth of the brain, things like that. You see it running in families, things like that. So not only to know specifically about the growth hormone, but it will be a combination of things. But yes, I think to some extent, you have some of these abnormalities that are resulting from some other abnormalities coming from the parents. But usually the growth hormone, I mean, what you are referring to as the growth hormone abnormality has to say that its secretion in lesser amount by a particular person, which is resulting in a person's, say dwarfism per se, is not a thing which we can specifically say is being inherited from a parent. To say that if that person is a dwarf, then the children will also be dwarfs. There are some people who are short, and later you see that their children are much taller than them, even though you see them as dwarfs that way. So it's when it is some combination of things, which is to do with also intellectual disabilities and things like that. Those ones, we see it in our society. See that person, there are some people who they themselves are okay, but somewhere along the family line, there was, some intellectual disabilities, which later, begin to show much more in their children. And part of it is to do with growth. You see such things occurring. Now, the human chorionic gonadotropin, which is secreted in the placenta, we see that it's actually being used as a biomarker in pregnancy test, so that within the first 13 weeks, the first trimester, you have the secretion of the HCG in elevated amounts. Then all these other hormones, the estrogen, the progesterone. So within such a, the first trimester, the amount of the HCG is used to actually determine pregnancy, and it's secreted in the corpus luteum, some particular tissues of the ovaries. You see that there. All right. Of course, function of it is for maintenance of pregnancy, because it's involved there in the development of the placenta. Right after conception and then implantation, you have these some specific cells, the cytotrophoblasts, that are, particularly there in the placenta, that will be, secreting this HCG. All right. The very last one, which is the pro-opiomelanocortin peptide family, is stated so because they are coming from the same gene. So if you look again, you see you have a numbering 1 to 39, 42 to 134, which is, and then in the bracket, you see something is written there like 93 amino acids. I mean, what this means is that one gene, when it is transcribed and translated, can give you different proteins. So if you take the sequence of the nucleotides from 1 to 39, that will give you that protein. which will be the adrenocorticotropin hormone. If you take the sequence from 42nd to 134th, that will give you these beta lipotropins. And even under this, the adrenocorticotropin hormone, you can have from number 1 to 13, giving you some melanocyte stimulating hormone. And then you can also have from 18 to 39, giving you these corticotropin-like intermediate lobe peptides. You can have other, lipotropins apart from the beta lipotropins. You also have the gamma lipotropins over there, and you also have, apart from the alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, from this region, you can also have the beta melanocyte stimulating hormones. Then you have these natural analgesics, endorphins, and enkephalins, also being some proteins which are also coming from this part of the genes. So because they are coming from the same gene, that is why it's grouped together as coming from this peptide family. We can quickly take a look at each of these. Actually, we've looked almost at all of these hormones already, but we can just quickly see that the adrenocorticotropin hormone, we have seen it already, acting on the adrenal gland, which is secreting some cortisol, which in stress conditions, cortisol will have some suppression on the immune system. And of course, it also has that feedback mechanism on the hypothalamus. So when in adequate amounts, it now inhibits the hypothalamus from further secreting the releasing hormone. We see in overproduction of the adrenocorticotropic hormone, this can result into what we refer to as a Cushing syndrome. So what you see here is, persons having something like a pendulous abdomen. You have such persons also having something like what you refer to as a buffalo hump, like a fat pad at the neck region. And the legs are smaller than the body. And such persons also suffer from some bruises on there. So the skin just is getting some bruises over it. So that's Cushing syndrome. The beta lipotropin hormones, these promote lipolysis. That is the breakdown of triacylglycerols into fatty acids and glycerol. And of course, if there is that breakdown of these triacylglycerols, there's going to be more of fatty acids in the system. So that's why we say it increases mobilization of fatty acids. And we do have some synthetic lipotropins, which are used for weight loss, of course, because it's involved in the breakdown of these fatty acids. And these lipotropins themselves, as we have seen for the diagram before, are acting as some precursors for the production of endorphins and enkephalins, which act in the body as some natural painkillers. We say natural analgesics, which means they are involved in the recognition of inflammation. So they respond to inflammation in the cells. The melanocyte stimulating hormone. So with exposure to, say, the sun, that can trigger some gene expression in some cell, the keratinocyte, which will then produce the alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone. So, here too, you can quickly relate that. Okay, so this can be some epigenetic regulation because this is sun exposure, which is causing such gene expression in the keratinocyte. And this melanocyte stimulating hormone then acts as a signaling molecule binding onto a specific cell, melanocyte. And by binding onto the melanocyte, you can see that it is now triggering such an activity. You see the cyclic adenosine monophosphate there as a second messenger, which will carry the message. And you have an expression of a gene in the melanocyte, which will result into the synthesis of some melanosomes, some pigments, which will then result into this synthesis of melanin. You can have either the synthesis of melanin when you have such an exposure to light, or you have an inhibition of the process of melanogenesis. All right. Now we take the last one, which is the posterior pituitary. And you remember the posterior pituitary is not under the control of the hypothalamus. It's on its own, and it is secreting only two hormones, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. Here we see oxytocin is a nonapeptide, consists of just 9 amino acids. So that's an oligopeptide. And we have talked of it before as involved in the contraction of the uterus during labor. And it also, acts in the contraction of the, the smooth muscles around the mammary glands, which is involved in the secretion of milk in the nursing period, after birth. So you have oxytocin acting in such a situation. Then the last one is the antidiuretic hormone, which acts in water regulation, and you see it's being secreted here. Under the you see the anterior pituitary, the posterior pituitary, which is releasing this the antidiuretic hormone itself. The posterior pituitary itself is not producing that hormone. It is actually produced by the hypothalamus, but then stored in the posterior pituitary, then released by it. That's not to say that the hypothalamus is stimulating the posterior pituitary. No, it's not stimulating it. It's just that the hormone is produced there, but after it's produced, it's stored in the posterior pituitary and then released from there. And is involved in, say, it acts like a vasoconstrictor, where it stimulates the constriction of the arterioles in the nephron. If you remember the structure of the nephron, you have the Bowman's capsule, and you have this glomerulus, where you have the filtration of the blood, to have urine excretion. And so the constriction of it will result into lesser amount of water being excreted out of the body, which eventually results into some water reabsorption by the kidneys. So that is to regulate the amount of water which is being excreted together with urine. So it's a hormone that its dysfunction also can be seen in a condition of diabetes insipidus, where you have this excretion of a lot of water, a lot of urine, coming out from such persons because they have this dysfunction of the antidiuretic hormone. All right, so this is where we end. I think today, even though it's been much more of a straightforward, I think because maybe this has interested you so much, and there have been a lot of questions throughout from the beginning to the end, which makes it more interesting. So we don't have any time left. We just have 2 minutes. If anybody has anything, a person can write in the chat. or the person can raise their hand. I think the best way is just to raise your hand and you'll be the last person to speak and everybody will hear you. So the floor is open. I think Aaron asked you asked this question the last time and I answered you that oxytocin, yes, released during sexual intercourse, yes, and because it's acting in the situation of contraction and relaxation of the uterus as well as the vulva of the vagina. So I think you asked a question about oxytocin being involved in pleasure, and I answered you on that. That because it's involved in such contraction and relaxation, of course, it can be acting in such situation of sexual intercourse to increase pleasure. All right, so I think our time is up. If there is no more comment or anything, then I wish you all the best for the rest of the week till we meet next time. I understand that we have maybe about 2-3 weeks more. So I hope that if we have some 2 more lectures, that should be okay. I will not want us to be doing anything new altogether within 2 weeks before exam. There shouldn't be any new thing altogether being introduced. So if we finish within the next 2 weeks, it will be good so that you have the rest of the 2 weeks to prepare well for your exams. All the best till we meet next time. Bye for now.